In my first high-level Godot tips video, I talked a little bit about how you control a character, and I wanted to touch a bit more on the physics system, and I also wanted to dive a little bit deeper into export variables and using type hints, because type hints can be really useful in Godot 4, because in Godot 4, not only can type hints be useful for auto-completion, they can also help with performance for GDScript. So let's take a look at these. Here on the character body 2D, you have far gravity, and it's an int, and project settings, and then get settings, and you're like, well, okay, well, that's great. Where is this? So project settings, and you just want to come down to physics 2D, and then here's where you'll find the gravity. And right now it looks like 980 is the default number, and that'll probably be the default number unless you've set up something specific for your own project or for, a template or something. Depending on what you're doing though, you may not need gravity involved at all. So for example, on my ball, let's scroll all the way up here, you'll notice like I don't have anything about gravity here. And when I click on my ball and I go back to here, you'll notice there is a floating right here. Let's take a look at that on the example player. So right now, the example player is grounded. And so it's going to have some stuff here like the floor. And this stuff on the floor is really the big thing. But and an up direction, by the way, as well. So if you wanted to make a game where you had to walk upside down for parts of it, you'd probably just want to flip this up direction at certain points once they cross into some sort of area or something. That's probably the way I would try to do it at first anyway. If I change this to floating though, you'll notice several of these settings go away, and you'll now just get the wall slide angle. And that'll really be it. And it'll know, I believe this is no longer affected by gravity as well. It's just important to keep this floating or grounded in mind, depending on what you're trying to set up. And so that's just really, really helpful. And the floating mode can be helpful if you're, not doing a typical like player, you're doing like a ball that floats, or you're doing a ship or something like that. All right, and so move and slide and move and collide. These are very, very common in Godot, especially when you're talking about a player or something that's going to move or be controlled, or enemies even. What this piece through here is doing, this is setting the velocity. Move and slide, I believe, is actually applying the velocity. And move and collide the same way, except that move and collide will also detect your collisions. So move and slide, you can do things like wall slide, like you can do that and realize that you're against a wall. But when it comes to like being able to bounce back like a ball would on a a Pong game or something like that, that's where you'd use something more like move and collide. And this move and slide, it doesn't have to be called directly here in the physics process. If you were doing something like a state machine, you could call move and slide from inside the state machine. You just want to make sure that you give whatever function that you're doing. So like if you had a move function, you want to make sure that you pass delta to the move function, because you will need that for any kind of velocity stuff, potentially. Godot 4 actually includes delta within velocity itself. So if you're not needing to do, this is very basic. If you were actually going to apply some acceleration to it as well, instead of just having this kind of on and off like this is, then you'd want to make sure you use delta when you apply that acceleration. So you'll notice I'm calculating the ball speed here, and I'm saying velocity times speed times delta. And that's the current velocity times the speed I've set up here, and then times delta time, or delta as it is in Godot. And it's because I am applying that acceleration this way. I'm not just using a flat kind of on-off like they are in the basic controller here. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you need to do move and slide, you probably want to, if you're going to do that in a separate function, you want to actually include delta. Now let's take a look at some export variables and type hints. And I want to show a couple different ways to do that. So I've added some export variables here, and let's take a look at these. So you'll notice this export var player color, and then I have a colon here and color. If I go ahead and I go back into this now, you'll notice there is a player color here, and if I click on this, I get an actual color wheel. And I can update this to be a specific color. And so now that player color is going to equal blue. And if I do it again for this next one, I can say player scene is a packed scene. And when I click this, it's going to ask me what I want to load. I want to quick load, and I can pick any scene that I have. So this could be something where if you're, for example, maybe you have levels, you have a main like world scene, and then you have levels in each individual scene that you need to call at certain points in time. That could be something where you have this packed scene, even if you don't necessarily use it as an export variable, or it could be something where you use the export variable for testing. The next one here, what I wanted to point out is this is an inferred type. So you see this colon equals here? That means that it's going to infer the type based on what we have to the right of it. And in this case, it's going to infer that this is an integer. And I can actually take that even further by saying something like colon equals, and then I can enter my number and then say as float, just so that I can specifically tell it, yep, this is a float, this is what it should be. So these are just two different ways of doing that. That's what the colon here means. That's a type hint over here. This is the same thing. This is just inferring the type. So this is not quite as safe as, using an actual type or doing the as cast, but it is something that can be useful, especially when you're looking. I think it's probably fine for things like floats and integers, but when it comes to something like a function that you're going to make it equal, or you're going to, call it something else, that's where it's probably more important. Like here, like gravity down here, it's probably more important to specify that this is an int, because we have no idea what this particular number could be right now. If you change that from an int, you'd obviously want to change that. The inferred types and the casting as a type, they're actually going to help you speed up your GDScript if you end up using GDScript. So that's something really important to keep in mind, and I think it's really useful. It also is very helpful if you are trying to do something like autocomplete, because autocomplete will be able to better interpret this. I think type hints can be really useful. I am glad that they're becoming more and more common in Godot 4 and GDScript. I am hoping that we will continue to see these evolved, and I will include a link to the inferred types discussion in the documentation. I think it's quite helpful. So like I say, to me, export variables and type hinting in particular is really useful in Godot 4. I think as GDScript gets better, I'm hoping that we will see more type hints and better, utilization of those type hints. Because to me, a lot of times I prefer a more strongly typed language. So I'm excited to see what kind of other features type hints may get in the future as GDScript continues to evolve. If you haven't seen the first Godot high-level tips video, you can take a look at it right here. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next time.